The morning began the way many travel days do, with people lining up at the airport carrying bags that meant something to them. Some bags held clothes. Some held gifts. Some held memories from the place they were leaving and hope for the place they were going. The weather outside the big glass windows looked calm, and planes moved slowly along the runway like quiet metal birds waiting for their turn to lift. Among the many travelers, there was a family of 3. The parents moved in that gentle way people do when they are guiding a child through a busy place. Their son held onto his small backpack with both hands, as if it carried something very special. He kept looking around, curious about everything. The screens, the planes, the long hallways that seemed to stretch forever. It was clear this flight meant something to him, maybe because travel still felt like an adventure. They reached the gate and took their seats, trying to stay relaxed while listening for their group to be called. The child swung his feet above the ground, not quite tall enough for them to touch the floor. Every few minutes he asked a question about the plane, the clouds, or where luggage goes after people hand it over. His parents answered patiently. They knew travel could feel exciting and a little scary at the same time, especially for someone young. Nearby sat a man traveling alone. He wore a neat jacket and carried a simple briefcase. His face showed the type of tired that comes from many trips in a short time. He checked his watch often, as if every minute mattered. Nothing about him looked unusual. He was just another traveler with somewhere to be and something on his mind. A flight attendant stood by the boarding door with a calm smile, greeting passengers and helping when needed. Her voice sounded patient and steady. She had done this many times before and understood that each person stepping on the plane carried their own story, their own worries, their own hopes for a safe trip. When boarding began, the family waited their turn. The father lifted the carry-on bag from the ground, and the mother reminded their son to stay close. The boy held his backpack a little tighter, trying to remember everything they had told him about sitting still, wearing a seatbelt and listening to the crew. He wanted to do things right. They walked down the long jet bridge together. The sound changed as they stepped forward, airport noise fading and the soft mechanical hum of the plane growing louder. Inside the cabin, lights glowed warmly above the rows of seats. People placed bags overhead, gently squeezed into narrow rows, and tried to make themselves comfortable for the journey ahead. The family reached their row. The boy chose the window seat, eyes already drawn to the wing and the wide sky beyond it. His parents took the 2 seats beside him, creating a small island of safety in a crowded space. The man traveling alone soon took the seat across the aisle. He set his briefcase neatly beneath the seat in front of him and gave a small nod to no one in particular. The flight attendant moved calmly through the cabin, helping passengers store bags that did not quite fit and reminding people to keep walkways clear. Her tone was firm yet kind, like someone who knew that calm words helped keep everything running smoothly. Every so often, she checked on the family's row and the rows nearby, making sure everyone felt settled. The plane filled slowly. A gentle buzz of voices floated through the cabin, soft conversations about meetings, holidays, relatives, and plans waiting at the other end of the flight. Some people leaned against the windows. Others closed their eyes before the plane had even begun to move. The boy stayed wide awake, glued to the world outside. He watched a baggage cart roll by and pointed quietly, as if each new thing he saw was a small miracle. Soon, the safety demonstration began. The flight attendant spoke clearly, showing passengers how to use seat belts and oxygen masks. Most people half watched, half thought about other things, but the boy followed every move. He liked learning how things worked. He liked the idea that there were people trained to help in case something unexpected happened. That thought comforted him. The engine started to hum louder, and the plane rolled slowly toward the runway. The cabin lights dimmed just a little. The boy's parents smiled at each other the way people do when they want to show calm even if they themselves feel a tiny bit nervous. The man across the aisle took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment, as if he wanted the time to pass more quickly. The plane turned, paused, then began to race forward. The boy pressed his back into the seat, surprised at how strong the push felt. The ground rushed past the window. Then, almost like magic, the world tilted, and the plane lifted into open air. Houses and roads below shrank into small lines and dots. The sky opened wide, soft and blue, carrying the plane upward like a gentle hand. Once the plane reached its steady height, the seat belt sign chimed off. People started to relax a bit more. Laptops opened. Books came out. Quiet conversations picked up again. The boy's mother adjusted his blanket around him, and his father helped him place his backpack under the seat while keeping one small toy within reach. The boy leaned his forehead against the cool window and stared at clouds that looked like floating mountains. The man across the aisle took out a small notebook and began to write. His face softened slightly, like someone lost in thought rather than stress. Still, a trace of impatience lingered in his eyes, the way it sometimes does when life feels heavier than it should. The flight attendant returned with the beverage cart, moving carefully down the aisle. She spoke kindly to everyone she met, asking what they would like to drink. When she reached the family, she smiled at the boy and offered juice. His parents thanked her. She then turned to the man across the aisle who asked for coffee. She handed it to him gently, reminding him that the cup might be hot. The boy glanced at the cup across from him, then back out the window. He did not think much about it. His mind was filled with clouds, wings, and the exciting idea of being so far above the world. His parents chatted quietly, grateful for a smooth start to the trip. The cabin felt peaceful. The hum of the engines became a kind of soft background music, steady and calming. People settled into their space, each person wrapped in thoughts no one else could see. It was one of those moments during a flight when everyone seems to breathe together, sharing the simple hope that the journey will remain as calm as it feels right then. The flight attendant continued to move through the cabin with steady care, checking on passengers, answering questions, and making sure everyone had what they needed. She noticed small details: a suitcase slightly blocking the aisle, a nervous flyer gripping the armrest, a child drifting into sleep. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that makes others feel safe, even if they never say it out loud. The boy's eyes sparkled as he watched sunlight dance across the wing. He whispered little comments to his parents about the shapes he saw in the clouds. A whale, a castle, a giant bird. They listened and smiled, happy to share this moment with him. Travel, for them, was not just about reaching a place. It was about the time they spent together getting there. And so the plane continued forward through calm air, carrying hundreds of stories inside one long silver body. Some belonged to people rushing to work, some to people hoping for rest, and some to people simply seeing the world with new eyes. For now, everything was peaceful. No one yet knew that before this flight landed, the calm would be tested, and character, more than anything, would matter. But in this moment, high above the clouds, there was only the steady sound of engines, the soft murmur of voices, and a quiet hope shared by everyone on board. That kindness and patience would guide the journey as surely as the plane's wings guided it through the sky. The flight continued smoothly for a while, with the plane moving gently through the sky. The boy at the window kept watching the clouds drift by like slow white ships. He felt safe in that small space beside his parents. The man across the aisle sat quietly with his notebook and warm cup of coffee, taking a sip now and then while he wrote. The flight attendant checked each row with the same steady care as before. She made sure seat belts were still buckled. She smiled at a few passengers who looked nervous. She asked a traveler near the back if they needed a blanket. Her job was busy, but she carried it with grace. The boy stretched a little in his seat. Long flights can make anyone feel restless, and he was still full of energy. His parents gently reminded him to stay seated, and he nodded, doing his best. He lifted his drink and took a careful sip, trying not to spill a drop. A soft chime sounded overhead, followed by the captain's calm voice. He shared a few words about the route and the weather, saying there might be a bit of movement in the air ahead, nothing to worry about, just the sky doing what the sky sometimes does. The flight attendant listened with the same steady attention as the passengers. She had heard messages like this many times, but she never stopped treating each one as important. A few minutes later, the plane gave a small, unexpected shake. Not a big one, just a gentle bounce that made a few cups rattle against their trays. It was the kind of movement that comes and goes quickly like a wave passing under a boat. The boy blinked in surprise. His parents placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. They told him it was normal and that planes were built to handle much more than that. He trusted them, and his heart settled again. Across the aisle, the man with the coffee felt the bump too. His hand shifted for a split second, and the cup tilted just enough for some of the warm liquid to slip over the edge. It wasn't a dramatic splash, just a small spill that surprised him more than anyone else. The coffee dripped onto his tray table and a little onto the side of his seat. He let out a quiet sigh, the way people do when something small goes wrong during an already long day. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired and a bit embarrassed, like he wished he could rewind the moment and hold the cup more tightly. The boy noticed the spill and turned his head slightly. His eyes widened because things like that always feel bigger to children than they do to adults. But he quickly saw that nothing bad had happened. No one was hurt. It was just coffee, and it was already starting to cool. The flight attendant reached the row just moments later. She noticed the small mess right away, not with alarm, but with calm understanding. She had seen far more challenging things on flights, and this, to her, was simply another chance to help. She spoke in a gentle voice, letting the man know it was all right. Accidents happen. That is part of being human. Her tone carried no judgment, only care. She handed him a stack of napkins and went to retrieve a cloth from the galley so he could clean the tray table more easily. The man thanked her quietly. He dabbed at the coffee with slow, careful movements. Some passengers nearby watched for a moment, then returned to their books, their screens, their thoughts. The sky outside still looked soft and blue, the wings still steady in the air. The boy's parents checked to make sure nothing had splashed onto their side of the aisle. A tiny drop had landed on the edge of the aisle floor, but it was already being wiped away. The boy looked at the flight attendant with curiosity, noticing how calm she stayed. He admired that. It made him feel safe to see adults handle little mistakes with kindness. The flight attendant returned with fresh napkins, a small cloth, and, after asking, a new cup of coffee for the man. This time she placed the cup securely into the holder built into the tray. She offered a quiet reminder to keep it there while the air was a little bumpy. There was nothing strict or scolding in her voice. It sounded more like advice from someone who cared about everyone's comfort. The man nodded again. His face softened a little, and for the first time on the flight, he seemed less weighed down by stress. Maybe it was the way the flight attendant spoke to him, or maybe it was the relief of knowing that no one was upset. Sometimes gentle understanding is all a person needs to breathe easier. The boy turned back to the window, but he still thought about what had just happened. He realized something important, that people don't have to be perfect for things to turn out fine. Sometimes hands slip, sometimes cups tip, and when people respond with patience, the problem becomes small again. The plane moved through a few more soft bumps in the air. They felt like tiny ripples rather than real shakes. The captain soon spoke again, letting everyone know the air ahead looked smoother. The small unease that had floated through the cabin disappeared. Conversations restarted. Laughter returned here and there like small sparks of light. The flight attendant checked in on the family, asking the boy if he was all right. He smiled shyly and said he was fine. She told him he was doing a great job staying calm and listening, and his parents thanked her for being so attentive. Her eyes warmed for a moment. She loved her job most when she could help people feel at ease. She then looked toward the man across the aisle and asked if he needed anything more. He shook his head politely and thanked her once more. Something in his manner shifted. He seemed a little more open, a little more aware that he was not alone in the world high above the clouds. The boy's parents exchanged a quiet glance. They felt grateful for the flight attendant's kindness. They also felt proud of their son for staying relaxed. They knew that travel could be full of small surprises, and how people responded to them mattered more than the surprises themselves. Minutes stretched into a soft rhythm again. The engines hummed with their steady, soothing sound. The boy leaned back in his seat, still awake but more peaceful now. He started to imagine stories in the clouds again. He saw shapes forming. A giant whale, a long train, a castle floating on invisible ground. The world outside the window felt like a dream, one that moved slowly and calmly across the sky. Across the aisle, the man went back to writing in his notebook. But every so often, he paused and looked around. He noticed the way the parents gently spoke to their son. He noticed the way the flight attendant checked on each row with the same respect and patience. He noticed the quiet teamwork of strangers sharing the same small space for a few hours. He took a thoughtful sip of his new coffee, much more careful this time, and set it right back in the holder. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. Sometimes even small accidents can remind a person to slow down, to breathe, to be present. The flight attendant moved toward the back of the plane again, but she kept a watchful eye on the cabin. She believed that flights were not just about getting people from one place to another. They were about care. They were about being there when someone needed help, even if the help was as simple as napkins and a kind word. The boy shifted in his seat again, this time more gently. He had learned from the earlier bump that small movements could ripple out. He didn't feel scared. Instead, he felt connected somehow to his parents, to the flight attendant, even to the man across the aisle. They were all sharing the same sky, the same moment. The day outside the windows carried on, bright and wide. Sunlight rested on the plane's wing, reflecting in soft flashes. Far below, the world stretched out in tiny colors and shapes, barely visible from such a height. Up here, people were closer to each other than they might ever be on the ground, and how they treated each other mattered even more. A calm settled over the cabin again, deeper this time. It was the kind of calm that comes after something small goes wrong and then goes right again. People relaxed into their seats. A few began to drift off to sleep. A quiet certainty seemed to spread, that this journey would continue with care. The boy whispered something to his parents, and they leaned in to listen. He said that he liked how the flight attendant helped everyone. His parents agreed. They told him that kindness was one of the strongest things a person could carry with them, no matter where they went. He held on to that thought, letting it sit warmly in his mind like sunshine on the window glass. And so the flight moved forward, with the sky calm once more and the people inside the plane a tiny bit closer than before. Not just in distance, but in understanding. The small spill that had briefly interrupted the quiet had also left behind something simple and good. A reminder that patience, compassion, and gentle words can turn even awkward moments into something softer. Something human. Something that brings people together rather than pushing them apart. The plane continued on its path, steady and sure, carrying its passengers toward the life waiting for them at the other end of the journey. None of them knew exactly what the rest of the flight would bring, but one thing felt certain. There would always be someone ready to help, to listen, to steady things when they wobbled, and to keep kindness at the center of the story. The flight moved on through the wide sky, the engine sound steady and calm, like a soft song that never stopped. People had settled again, each inside their own small world. The boy by the window felt lighter now. He watched the clouds change shape and drift apart, and the little worry he had felt earlier seemed to melt away into the bright blue around the plane. The man across the aisle sat quietly with his notebook closed for the moment. He looked out into the sky as if he were thinking about something far beyond the horizon. Maybe he was replaying the small accident in his head. Maybe he was thinking about the way the flight attendant had handled it without making him feel worse. He did not look tense now. His shoulders had dropped a little, like he had finally let go of some invisible weight. The flight attendant walked the aisle again, checking on people in that steady, kind way she had. She wasn't loud. She didn't rush. She carried herself with a sense of purpose that felt calm and warm at the same time. She stopped here and there to answer a question, to bring water, to smile at a shy traveler who seemed unsure of what to do. Each small act was simple, but it mattered. When she reached the family's row, she paused for a moment longer. She gently asked the boy if he was still comfortable. He nodded, a soft grin forming. His parents thanked her again, not just for the napkins earlier, but for her patience. She replied in that same easy tone that she was glad to help, and that keeping everyone safe and comfortable was the most important part of the job. Across the aisle, the man listened. Something about her words made him think. He looked up and said a quiet thank you too, almost as if he had been waiting for the right moment to say it. His voice sounded sincere. There was no pride, no embarrassment now, just appreciation. The The flight attendant nodded gently, offering another small smile before moving on toward the middle of the cabin. A sense of connection began to grow in that small section of the plane. The boy kept glancing at the man across the aisle, not out of worry, but with the simple curiosity children often have. The man noticed once, gave a tiny smile back, and then went back to his notebook. It was a small exchange, but a warm one, the kind that reminds people that they share more space, more life, than they think. The sky outside changed as the plane flew forward. The bright blue softened into soft layers of white and pale gold. The clouds formed long stretches that looked like quiet fields floating miles above the ground. Sunlight slid across the cabin, touching one row at a time. Some passengers closed their windows to nap. Others left theirs open to keep watching the silent world outside. The boy's parents spoke quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone nearby. They talked about the place they were going, the people they would see, and the memories they hoped to make. The boy listened with half an ear while still staring out into the distance, dreaming in that open, gentle way children do. The man across the aisle began to write again, but the words came from a different place now. His shoulders were still relaxed. His face looked softer. Every so often, he paused to sip his coffee carefully, then placed the cup back in the holder like it was a small promise to himself. The flight attendant returned to the front and quietly spoke to another crew member, making sure everything in the cabin was as it should be. Passengers saw only the simple part, the smiles, the drinks, the calm presence, but behind it all was teamwork, awareness, and care. They kept watch without making anyone feel watched. That was part of the beauty of it. A short time later, the seatbelt sign came on again with a gentle chime. The captain's voice filled the cabin once more, calm and clear. He explained that there would be a stretch of slightly uneven air ahead. Nothing serious, just a reminder to stay seated for a little while. His tone carried reassurance, like a friend speaking instead of a stranger. The boy's parents helped him sit back fully in his seat. He clicked the belt back into place and checked it twice, wanting to follow the rules exactly. The man across the aisle did the same, closing his notebook and placing it safely on the tray. The air outside shifted just a little. The plane dipped and rose slowly, almost like it was breathing with the sky. This time, the boy was not startled. He remembered the earlier moment and the way the flight attendant had handled it. That memory worked like a small anchor inside him, keeping him steady. The flight attendant walked the aisle one last time before taking her own seat. She checked seat belts, trays, and bags with patient, friendly reminders. When she reached the family's row, she gave the boy a small thumbs up, which made him smile again. When she reached the man across the aisle, she simply nodded, as if to say, "All is well." Then she took her seat and buckled in. The plane moved through the uneven air with gentle ups and downs. A few people gripped their armrests, but nothing felt out of control. It was simply the sky being the sky. The captain had been right. After a little while, the bumps faded away like ripples on a quiet lake, and the air smoothed again. People slowly relaxed. Some let out quiet breaths they hadn't realized they were holding. The cabin returned to its calm rhythm, the steady song of engines filling the space once more. The boy leaned toward the window again, though this time he did so a little more carefully. He had learned how small actions could ripple around him. His parents rested beside him, grateful for the quiet return of peace. Across the aisle, the man took another thoughtful sip of his coffee. He looked around with new eyes, seeing not just strangers, but people sharing a moment in time. He saw the elderly passenger 2 rows up who kept folding and unfolding a newspaper, the young traveler near the back who laughed softly at a movie, the person reading a thick book with deep focus, and the child by the window who watched the sky like it was a storybook. He realized that everyone on the plane carried their own reasons for travel. Some joyful, some heavy, some somewhere in between. And somehow, for a short time, their journeys overlapped in this flying room above the clouds. The flight attendant unbuckled when it was safe again and returned to her quiet watch, ready to help whenever anyone needed anything. She checked the family one more time, just with a glance, making sure the boy still looked comfortable. He did. In fact, he looked peaceful, like someone who had learned something important about the world. not from a lecture, but from a moment of kindness. She also looked to the man across the aisle. Their eyes met for a brief second, and he gave a grateful nod, not just for the napkins or the replacement coffee, but for the way she had handled everything with dignity and care. It was a simple exchange, yet full of meaning. The hours in the sky stretched on in a calm, almost timeless way. The world outside remained endless and quiet. The world inside the plane became softer, warmer, more connected. People shared small smiles, quiet words, silent understanding. The boy eventually rested his head against the window, not quite asleep but drifting halfway there. His parents covered him with the thin airline blanket, tucking it gently around his shoulders. They whispered to each other about how well he had handled the day so far, and how proud they were of the way he watched and listened. The man across the aisle closed his eyes too, not to sleep, but simply to rest. His hands lay still on his lap, no tension in them anymore. The notebook waited on the tray, its pages partly filled with thoughts that belonged only to him. And the flight attendant continued her quiet work, moving through the cabin like a steady heartbeat, there when needed, calm when not. She knew that most people would forget her face once they left the plane. But she also knew that the feeling she created, safety, respect, kindness, might stay with them much longer. And that was enough. The plane floated on toward its destination, carrying not only luggage and people, but also the gentle reminder that small moments of care can change how a whole day feels. High above the earth, where the world looks small and life feels fragile, it becomes easier to see what truly matters. Patience, understanding, and the simple courage to treat one another with kindness, even when the day doesn't go perfectly. In that shared space in the sky, the story of a small spill had quietly grown into something else. A story of people doing their best, of mistakes handled with grace, of strangers becoming a little less separate. And as the clouds drifted by and the sunlight faded to a softer glow, everyone on board continued forward together, wrapped in the calm that follows care. The sky outside had begun to soften from bright blue to the gentle colors that come when the day starts to lean toward evening. The light in the cabin changed with it, turning warm and calm. People shifted, stretched, and quietly looked forward to landing. The long part of the journey had passed, and the plane now carried with it a sense of quiet patience. The boy by the window had grown comfortable with the steady rhythm of the flight. His earlier nervousness was gone, replaced with curiosity and a soft calm only the clouds seemed able to give. His parents felt the same. They spoke in low voices, sharing small smiles, grateful for how peacefully things had unfolded after the little spill earlier. Across the aisle, the man with the notebook sat still for a while, letting his thoughts drift. He took another careful sip of coffee, then rested the cup in the holder again. His eyes didn't look tired in the same way anymore. They looked thoughtful. Maybe he was realizing how easily a stressful day could soften when people treated one another with kindness. The flight attendant continued to move through the cabin in that same quiet, steady way. She checked on passengers without making a big show of it. She helped an elderly traveler reach the overhead bin. She brought water to someone who coughed gently into a napkin. She bent down so she could listen carefully when anyone spoke to her. Every movement seemed guided by patience. After the bit of uneven air had passed, the crew began to prepare the cabin for the final part of the flight. The cart rolled through the aisle again with snacks and last drinks. The atmosphere felt lighter, like everyone on board was sharing the same feeling. Almost there. When the flight attendant reached the family again, she paused and asked, in a caring tone, if the boy wanted a snack. His face brightened a little, and he nodded shyly. She handed him a small packet and told him he had done a great job during the flight. His parents thanked her once more, and the boy repeated the thank you softly, not wanting to draw attention to himself but wanting her to know he meant it. She then turned to the man across the aisle. He asked for a simple glass of water this time, and she handed it to him with the same warmth she gave everyone else. For a brief second he looked like he might say more, then he simply smiled, a real smile, not the kind a person puts on out of habit. She nodded back, understanding without needing many words. The cabin slowly became a place of gentle conversation. People began to talk about what awaited them after landing. Family members waiting at the airport, hotel rooms, meetings, or simply a quiet ride home. A few shared stories with seatmates they had never met before that day. Travel has a way of opening small windows between strangers, and on this flight, those windows opened gently and kindly. The boy finished his snack and wiped his hands carefully. He was learning to be mindful in the small space he shared with others. His parents praised him quietly, and he felt proud, not in a loud way, but in the steady, growing way children feel when they realize they are doing well. The man across the aisle closed his notebook again and tucked it away. He took out a small cloth and made sure the last trace of coffee had been cleaned from his tray. It wasn't that he was worried about it anymore. It was more that he wanted to leave the space the way he had found it. A simple act, but meaningful. The flight attendant walked toward the front and spoke softly with another crew member. Together they reviewed the details of the small incident from earlier, not to make it bigger than it was, but because that was part of their job, to keep track, to learn, to make sure everyone stayed safe and comfortable. They treated the record like what it truly was. A note about people doing their best in a shared space. As the plane began its gradual descent, the captain's voice returned to the cabin. He thanked everyone for flying, shared the current weather at their destination, and reminded passengers to prepare for landing. His tone carried the same calm steadiness it had all flight long. There was something reassuring about that, knowing the voice guiding them never changed, no matter the moment. The boy looked out the window again and noticed the clouds starting to thin. Patches of land peeked through below, little patterns of green and brown, roads like thin ribbons, tiny dots that were actually buildings. It amazed him how small everything looked from up high. It made the world feel both huge and close at the same time. The seat belt sign chimed on again. People adjusted themselves. Bags were tucked away. Trays clicked closed. The flight attendant did her final walk through the cabin, gently reminding people to sit back and buckle up. When she reached the family, the boy gave her a small wave. She smiled and returned the wave, a brief but sweet exchange that seemed to light up the moment. As she checked the man across the aisle, he spoke in a low, thoughtful tone. He thanked her not only for the help earlier, but for the way she had handled everything, with patience, without judgment, and with quiet grace. He admitted that he had been having a difficult day before the flight, but her calm had helped him more than she probably knew. She listened, then gave him the kind of reply that came from the heart. She said that people have hard days, and that sometimes all anyone needs is a bit of understanding. She told him that it mattered that he had tried to do better after the spill, and that kindness rarely goes unnoticed. It wasn't a long conversation, but it was real. Two people sharing a human moment, thousands of feet above the world. The boy's parents heard some of it, and their hearts warmed. They were reminded that even in simple places, even in the narrow space of an airplane aisle, people could lift each other up with words that cost nothing. Soon the plane dipped lower, the ground growing clearer beneath them. The lights in the cabin brightened slightly, and the quiet movement of landing preparation filled the space. The boy felt a small flutter of excitement in his chest. Landings always felt like endings and beginnings at the same time. As the wheels approached the runway, the cabin became quiet again. People held their breath just a little, that natural pause that comes when metal meets earth. Then came the soft, steady bump of the wheels touching down. A gentle roll followed. The engines shifted tone, the plane slowed, and a wave of quiet relief passed through the cabin like a whisper. They had arrived safely. Applause didn't break out, but smiles did. People relaxed their shoulders. The boy let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His parents squeezed his hands gently. Across the aisle, the man let his eyes close for a brief moment, as if saying a silent thank you, not just for the safe landing, but for the way the journey had changed the shape of his day. As the plane taxied toward the gate, the flight attendant made one last announcement, thanking everyone for their cooperation and patience during the flight. Her voice carried that same quiet warmth the passengers had come to recognize. It felt genuine, like she truly meant it, not just as part of her job, but as a person speaking to other people. When the seatbelt sign turned off, everyone slowly began to stand, retrieve bags, and prepare to step back into their separate lives. The boy carefully gathered his backpack and the small toy he had kept close during the flight. His parents reminded him to wait his turn and be patient in the aisle. He nodded, proud to do just that. The man across the aisle lifted his briefcase and paused for a moment before leaving. He turned to the family and said he hoped the rest of their travels would be peaceful. The boy smiled back, a little shy but sincere. The parents thanked him kindly. It was such a simple exchange, but it felt like a small stitch of goodness sewn into the day. As each row stepped forward, the passengers passed the flight attendant at the front of the plane. She thanked them one by one, truly seeing each person as they left. When the family reached her, she bent down slightly so she could say goodbye to the boy at eye level. She told him he had been a wonderful passenger. His face brightened, and he said goodbye in a soft but clear voice. Then the man across the aisle reached her. He paused for a moment and offered one last thank you, not rushed, not casual. She placed a hand lightly over her heart and said it had been a pleasure serving everyone on board. For a brief moment, the aisle seemed to disappear, and there were only two people speaking kindly to one another. Nothing more, nothing less. One by one, the passengers stepped out of the plane and into the bright light of the terminal. The journey in the sky was over, but the feelings of calm, patience, and connection lingered gently in their minds. And though they would all go their separate ways, to families, to work, to new places and old ones, something subtle but meaningful remained. A reminder that even in crowded, busy spaces, people can choose to act with care. A reminder that small mistakes don't have to grow into big problems when kindness is present. A reminder that strangers can share a moment and walk away a little lighter than before. High above the world, inside a metal body with wings, a simple truth had quietly unfolded. The way people treat each other matters, always. In the air, on the ground, everywhere life carries them. The plane began its slow, careful drop through the clouds, and the cabin filled with that soft, steady hum that always came near the end of a long flight. People shifted in their seats, stretched, and started to think about the ground waiting for them. But for the boy and his mother, the moment felt much bigger than that. It felt like the last stretch of a long test that had started the instant hot coffee splashed where it never should have. The flight attendant who had stepped in earlier kept her calm presence. She moved down the aisle, checking seat belts and tray tables, but every now and then her eyes returned to the boy to make sure he was okay. He gave a small nod each time, trying to show he was fine, even though his feelings were still tangled inside him. His mother sat close, her arm resting across his shoulders, not too tight, just enough to say she was there. She spoke in a soft voice now and then, telling him he had done nothing wrong, telling him how brave he had been to stay calm. He listened, but his thoughts were louder. He wondered why someone would act like that. He wondered if it would always be like this. And then he wondered if maybe, just maybe, this moment did not have to follow him forever. Across the aisle, the man who had caused all the trouble sat very still. The earlier anger had drained from his face. Now there was only a tired look, the kind a person gets when they finally see themselves from the outside and do not like what they see. He kept looking down at his empty cup, as if it held all the answers he wished he had sooner. The words he had used, the tone in his voice, and the careless way he had acted replayed in his head again and again, and he could not escape from it. The head flight attendant came over and spoke to him in a calm, steady voice. She explained what would happen when the plane landed. There would be a report. There would be people waiting to talk. It was serious because words and actions on a plane matter. He nodded, not arguing, not trying to explain anything away. For the first time, he understood that it was not about winning an argument. It was about the harm he had caused, especially to a child. The boy's mother thanked the crew member quietly for taking the situation seriously. The attendant shook her head gently and said that everyone deserved to feel safe and respected, no matter where they sat or who they were. She said it the same way she might have said, "The sky is blue," as if it was a simple truth that needed no debate. That tone alone helped the boy breathe a little easier. As the plane passed through a patch of clouds, it shook for a second. A few people gasped, then laughed it off. But the boy just closed his eyes and let the rise and fall of the plane rock him. In that brief moment, he was not thinking about spilled coffee or sharp words. He was just a kid waiting to land, waiting to get off a plane and feel real ground under his feet. Soon the pilot's voice came over the speakers, warm and calm, thanking everyone for their patience and kindness during the flight. The boy's mother gave a small smile at that word, kindness, because she had seen both the lack of it and the power of it in the same few hours. The boy looked up at the ceiling, listening, and he wondered if the pilot knew what had happened back in row 17. Probably not. But the crew had known, and they had chosen kindness and courage anyway. When the wheels touched the runway, there was a soft bump, then a long, steady roll. People clapped, as people sometimes do, happy to be back on the ground. The boy did not clap, but he did let out a slow breath he had been holding without noticing. As the seatbelt sign went off, everyone stood at once, reaching for bags and coats, forming a slow-moving line in the narrow aisle. The boy and his mother stayed seated. The flight attendant had asked them to wait a moment, just so they would not have to stand in the middle of all the chatter and noise. The boy did not mind. He looked out the window instead, watching workers on the ground move around like tiny figures in a quiet play. The man in the aisle seat across from them stayed put too. After a few minutes he turned, not fast, not sharp, just with slow care, and spoke in a soft voice. He said he was sorry. Not the kind of quick sorry someone says just to end a conversation, but the kind that comes from deep in the chest, where regret lives. He said he had been wrong. He said there was no excuse. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not try to explain. He simply said he was sorry for the way he had treated the boy. The mother looked at him for a long second, reading his face. Then she nodded once. She said that words mattered. She said that kindness mattered even more. And then she turned back to her son. The boy listened, and part of him wanted to turn away, but another part of him wanted to hear the man say it. He did not say anything back, but he did give a small nod. It was not acceptance of what had happened. It was a sign that he heard the words and would think about them later. Airport staff came on board. They spoke with the crew, then with the man, then with the mother. There were calm voices, clipboards, and steady nods. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just careful steps to make sure the right thing was done. The boy watched the way the adults handled it. He learned, in that small floating room on wheels, that justice does not always need to shout. Sometimes it speaks in soft, firm voices that refuse to look away. When the boy and his mother finally stood up to leave, the flight attendant was waiting for them near the door. She bent a little so she was closer to the boy's height and told him he had handled a hard day with grace. She told him that how he carried himself mattered, and that he should be proud of his calm strength. He did not always feel strong, but hearing it said out loud put a tiny light inside his chest. They stepped out into the bright tunnel that led to the airport. The air smelled different there, full of coffee, perfume, and long trips. People rushed past, already thinking of taxis, families, and hotel rooms. For the boy and his mother, each step felt like a step away from something heavy. Later, as they waited for their bags, the boy asked his mother a question. He asked why some people act the way that man had acted. She thought for a moment before answering. She said sometimes people carry things inside them. Fear, anger, or old ideas that should have been left behind long ago. And sometimes those things spill out in hurtful ways. But she also said that there are always others, like the crew, like kind passengers, who will stand up for what is right. And that was what he should remember. The boy let those words rest in his mind. He looked around at the busy baggage hall and saw many faces, many families, many stories. Not all of them were the same as his. But he knew something quietly powerful now. His voice mattered, his safety mattered, and there were people in the world who would stand beside him when it counted. As they walked toward the exit, the man who had caused the trouble was still back in a quiet room with airport staff. His day would not end the way he had planned. There would be reports, maybe more than that. But the most important part had already happened inside his own heart. He had seen what his actions looked like through the eyes of a child. And that was something he would not forget. Outside, the sky was wide and soft, painted with evening colors. Cars moved in long, bright lines. The boy and his mother headed toward their ride, rolling their suitcase along the sidewalk. A cool breeze brushed past them. The world felt big again, not small and tight like the inside of a plane. That night, in a quiet room far from any runway, the boy lay in bed and thought about the day. He remembered the shock of the coffee, the way his heart had raced, the strong, steady voice of the flight attendant, and the soft apology at the end. He remembered his mother's hand on his shoulder. He remembered the way the plane lifted and landed, like a long breath in and out. He decided that his story, would not only be about the bad moment. It would also be about the helpers, the calm voices, and the way he kept his head high even when he wanted to hide. It would be about the way people chose respect when it mattered most. And somewhere else, the man who had made the mistake sat at his own table, replaying the day. He thought about the boy's quiet face, the shock in his eyes, and the strength he had shown without saying a word. The man knew he had to do better from that day forward. He knew he had to unlearn things that had no place in the world anymore. It was not easy work, but it was necessary. So the story did not end with anger. It ended with lessons, apologies, and the slow work of change. It ended with a mother and son who held each other a little closer, and with a flight attendant who went home knowing she had done the right thing. And it ended with the simple truth that kindness, courage, and respect can lift people higher than any plane ever could.